that was fantastic. And if there's one company and one person that could help Bill and AT&T solve all the capacity demands, it's Qualcomm and Peggy Johnson. We love having Qualcomm as a member. Peggy is the executive vice president of Qualcomm, and she's responsible for commercializing new businesses, business opportunities, and developing strategic relationships for the company. She's also the president of Global Market Development. She oversees Qualcomm Labs, which serves as an incubator focused on launching new businesses and products, as well as exploring new market segments for Qualcomm. And she's also a member of the executive committee at Qualcomm. So she's been there for 24 years, holding positions in nearly every facet of the country, one of the great leaders in the wireless industry, and she's been head of the executive vice president of the Americas in India, where she played an instrumental role in global development and adoption of 3G wireless in those regions. A true giant in the industry. We're very fortunate to have her. Let's welcome Peggy Johnson.
Take off all of your skin and bread when you were free. Shake off all of your skin.
Nice music transition there. Thanks for having me this morning. Jonathan kills me when people say, you've been here 24 years. It's actually almost 25 years I've been in the wireless industry. It seems like a long time, but I have to say what's been amazing about it is just the explosion of innovation that I got to see in my almost 25 years now at Qualcomm. Really, it didn't just evolve, it revolved the wireless industry. And back when I first started, that was the days of Michael Douglas and the Wall Street movie with the big phone, and that looked very cool at the time. And we ended up making phones and getting involved on the infrastructure side of the business as well. But I think what's interesting, and I think we're hearing from some of the folks today, the industry is really at quite an inflection point right now, where we're going from really, talking on the phone to data on the phone to talking to our environment. Our phone is going to have more and more radios in it. Our environment's going to have more and more radios. It's really, as we step from sort of that more one-to-one into one-to-many environment, how do we handle all that? And I was talking to Bill earlier today, and he said he's worried about how much data is flowing, and his predictions were far below what we think we see from our viewpoint at Qualcomm of how much data capacity we're going to need going forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. First, just going back to mobile and the impact, one of the things that I think when we all get excited about is when there's a new feature, 21 megapixel cameras in our phone. Pretty amazing stuff. But what's been gratifying for me to see over these years is how mobile has actually changed people's lives. And we're involved in it's really a strategic initiative at Qualcomm called Wireless Reach. And each of the folks that you see up here has had their lives impacted in a very significant way. The young fisherman, a gentleman named Devin Nathan, I had the opportunity to meet. We put a cell phone in his hand with an app on it that helped him fish better, basically. He got weather, he got water temperature, he knew which port to sell his fish at the end of the day that would give him a higher price. Basically changed the man's life. His income is double and sometimes triple that of what it used to be. One cell phone, one app. The gentleman on the far right there is Dr. Eric Topol. Some of you may know him. He's a cardiac surgeon out of San Diego, and he was one of the first to come see us about the merging of the health industry and the wireless industry. And he talks about this all the time, how it will change health outcomes, but he himself has an application that has basically put an EKG on a handset, and he draws a couple of probes off it, and it's nearly as good as the machine that's in doctors' offices today. And he got to put this into use the other day. He was on a flight, a transcontinental flight, and the dreaded, is there a doctor on board? Comes over the loudspeaker, and the flight attendant said, we think someone's having a heart attack here. Runs over, pulls out his phone, and the phone basically tells him the gentleman is having a heart attack. The pilot made an emergency landing, and they already had all the data on his heart. They rushed him to the hospital, and the whole thing had a better outcome than if it had just been, a normal flight. So that was something that we were really gratified to see. And then lastly, the young woman down in the bottom right there, her name's Taylor Scott, and she's from a group of at-risk kids in North Carolina. And we did an experiment where we took a cell phone and had the same teacher who taught the 2 classes of algebra. And one kid's group had cell phones with a math app on it. And they could use the application inside and outside the classroom, and they were able to coordinate and talk to each other and collaborate. 7/24, they could talk to the teacher, they could talk to each other. And that application improved the test scores on the state math exam by 30%. And this young woman ends up getting 95% in her math. A young woman who felt she wasn't good in math, was told she wasn't good in math, going off to university this year. So just those kind of things just really warm my heart, because it does change the trajectory of folks' lives. But getting back to where we are now, really mobile broadband has had a tremendous impact on the flow of data. But if the bottom line here is basically the 3G line. So when we first introduced the first introduction of mobile broadband was back in 2004. We had nearly 2 megabits per second, and today with improvements along the 3G line to HSPA+, we're up at about 63 megabits per second. Along comes LTE, 100 megabits per second. In just a few years, Cat 4, 150 megabits per second, and now this year we've launched 300 megabits per second. So non-linear growth, amazing growth, and that's what now customers have come to have this expectation that their broadband needs to be much like their fixed broadband, because they're not fixed anymore. And so the expectation and the bar has been set very, very high. I think what's interesting to note is that when we first started in this industry, and I know we come from all different parts of it, there was such an alphabet soup of air interfaces. Finally, we're converging to LTE. And this is made even more exciting with the launch of LTE later this year in China. China Mobile, biggest carrier in the world, will be launching 4th generation. It'll really be a boost to the ecosystem, both on the device side and on the infrastructure side. But this common global standard has been needed for a long time, and that will just make this ecosystem of devices really explode. And the idea that both TDD and FDD, LTE, can be paired together. You can aggregate them together. These kind of stranded pieces of spectrum can now be part of the solution. Very, very exciting. And the fact that you can seamlessly fall back and go forward between 3G and 4G. So the user experience is going to be very, very much improved as we move forward. If we look at LTE adoption around the world, we've now got 279 networks launched in over 100 countries. But I think what's significant is 32 of these operators are now either launching or have launched TDD. And TDD, again, the unpaired pieces of spectrum at one time were thought to be maybe not as usable, very much usable. In fact, the base of LTE, TDD, and FDD is very much the same, the duplexer base. So very exciting to see that growth. And year over year now, 124% from this January to last January, the growth in LTE. So just an explosion of usage, but along with that, explosion of data, a lot more data running around, and explosion in users' expectations of how the network is going to feel to them. With LTE, obviously our peak data rates are going to go up, a lot more capacity, and then just the seamless user experience going back and forth now that the standard is converging is something that the users are really coming to expect. One thing I know that this audience will like is more antennas are a good thing. We have already, most of the LTE networks that have launched already have launched with 2x2 MIMO, multiple in, multiple output antennas. And obviously more to come. But the user improvement versus the relative base is about 1.7 right now, about 70% better in our simulations with 4 antenna receive diversity, and just getting better from there. So a little bit of change on the handset and the infrastructure side really, really improves the performance and the gain throughout the network. And so we're pretty excited about that. And again, more to come. We're really sort of just on the first side of that LTE curve. And it's interesting, we do continue to evolve the 3G standard along the way, mostly because a lot of areas around the world don't have spectrum yet, they're not ready. There's regulatory issues, they need to clear spectrum, so that is continuing to evolve. But the way that LTE is evolving is so much faster than 3G, which is really, a good thing for everybody all around. The next big thing that's going on is this aggregation of carriers inside of LTE Advanced. And really the gold standard for this year is 300 megabits per second. So it's 2 by 20 megahertz. We started with 2 by 10 megahertz, putting those together and making basically a fatter pipe. Pretty exciting stuff, and again, just the start. We'll be headed out to 450 megabits per second with Cat10, just around the corner, not too far off. So a lot of excitement there. But again, just showing that these fragmented pieces of spectrum, there is a use for them. It can all happen inside the handset in conjunction with the network side. That'll end up being a great user experience. Something we're pretty excited about is finally the standardization of a broadcast mode in 4G. And I think some of you may know we were involved with something called MediaFlow. It was a business we ran from 2007 to 2011 here in the US. And it was off cellular. We purchased separate spectrum. We had a separate receiver in the handset. And maybe a little ahead of its time in that we expected more video by then. Now we have all the video we can handle, but at the time, those were early days for video on handsets. And really what led us there was watching what happened in Korea when they first launched video. They actually had a flat rate, launched video, a couple people in each cell site started to watch the video, took the network down, took the cell site down. So we knew there had to be a different way, and our initial response to that was the MediaFlow network. Subsequent to that, we really repurposed what we did from the standalone network, which proved to be a little more costly than we would have liked, into a standardized version in LTE broadcast, and essentially proved the same thing. You need a better way to deliver video, and for common content, for breaking news, weather, disasters, sports, those sorts of things, downloads of the operating system during the night, downloads of common content during the night, newspapers, magazines. You just need a better way to do this. And broadcast mode is a great way to do it. And with LTE broadcast, you can dynamically change the cellular pipe, if you will, dynamically to a broadcast mode on the fly. It gives the operator a lot of flexibility. It's not as disruptive to the network, and it just comes inside the handset. So KT has already launched commercially earlier this year in January. Also in January, Verizon showed off LTE broadcast at the Super Bowl. They had 4 streams on the same tablet. It was real exciting. It showed you the opportunity with broadcast and some new services that can come. And we expect before the end of this year, probably a couple more operators to launch commercially, and we've got about 8 trials going, so everybody's very interested in this. Certainly a great way to offload, some of the congestion that we're seeing on the networks. Around Qualcomm, we have something we call the 1000X Data Challenge. And essentially what that is I'm going to my conversation I had with Bill Smith a little bit earlier here today. We are seeing basically a doubling of data on the networks every year. So in a period of 10 years, you're going to get to 1000x more capacity needed than today. How do you solve for that? Much of the data is video. Right now, it's about half of the content, going to about 2/3 by 2017. So huge demand on the network. We're hearing different numbers for how many connections will be inside of the Internet of Everything by 2020. Some say 25, some say 30, some say 50 billion. Whatever the number is, it's going to be another drain on the network. So we'll have that added on top of all the devices each of us have. So we need to prepare for this world where we're not making any more spectrum. So how do you get ready for something like that? When we took a look at it around Qualcomm, we said we really need a different approach to acquiring, deploying, and managing the resources in order to reach this 1000x challenge. And so we looked at it in 3 different ways. Clearly, more spectrum is needed. It's the lifeblood of this industry. It's starting to loosen up a bit. There needs to be some more clearing on various pieces, but we're seeing more of it coming out onto the market all over the world through auction. And we're excited about that, but again, finite. It only goes so far. So to the extent that any of you have the ability to push for more of that in Washington, we appreciate any efforts there because it's very much needed. But the other way, and we think maybe the most impactful way to reach our 1000x challenge is through small cells. And you've heard many of the folks today talk about that already, but this hyperdensification of the network absolutely is going to be the way that we reach the final 1000x in the period of time that we're talking about. And when we say small cells, it works very much in sync with the macro network. So it's the filling in enterprise, in residential, in public spaces, really just about everywhere is where it's needed and where we're going to have to get to. And we think much of the deployment needs to be ad hoc, and it needs to be self-organizing. So that number of small cells, you can't rely on a truck roll or any sort of tuning. You've got to get them out there, and you've got to get them talking to each other and managing themselves in a way that's not harmful to the macro network. And a lot of that is kind of in our wheelhouse at Qualcomm, the managing of radios and the power management between those things. So we have a very large R&D program focused on the small cell effort right now. And it's really going to take a mix of outdoors, indoors, a mix of Wi-Fi along with LTE characteristics. So it's a hybrid network. It's not a reliance on just one or the other. And as I said, incorporating the self-organizing network techniques. So if we look back at spectrum for a moment, really our highest and probably our number one priority is exclusive license spectrum. I mean, that can manage to the highest quality of service, and really is, if we had our choice, would be our number one choice to obtain in order to expand the networks today. There's a couple other choices that are very interesting. This idea of shared access. So accessing government bands that are used very little, maybe just used in certain geographies, maybe just at certain times. And as long as we can allow that the same, you can depend upon the same quality of service in your normal exclusively licensed networks, if we can make that sharing work, it turns out to be a pretty good solution. And we've through trials already have proven that we can interoperate with various uses of government uses of spectrum. And right now, the one that we're looking at most closely is the 3.5, and it's going to work. And so these are the sorts of techniques that we have to go beyond just our standard, yeah, we'd love some exclusively licensed spectrum, but what else can we do? And then lastly, a very interesting area is the use of unlicensed spectrum in a non-harmful way to the other unlicensed users in the space. And so we have quite an effort going on here to put LTE into the unlicensed bands and to dynamically use those when available, but in a very controlled fashion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're excited about that because, again, it kind of highlights the hybrid nature that we believe we have to depend on in order to meet the 1000x challenge. So if we look at LTE into the unlicensed, to us on the handset side, it looks very much like a piece of spectrum that, you know, when one of our global operators said, okay, I just won an auction, can you incorporate this band into your handset, into your RF front end, into your handsets, the chip device? And so when we look at unlicensed, it's very much the same thing. And right now we're focused on the 5 gigahertz band. So in the same way that we carry or aggregate various stranded pieces of spectrum, we can look at that 5 gigahertz and again, being a very good neighbor, and we've actually proven we're a better neighbor than another Wi-Fi access point in that band. We can aggregate that piece in dynamically when someone's in the proximate vicinity of that access point and the spectrum is available, use it, and then let it go as they continue on down their way. And it's an interesting use of spectrum that you know, maybe wasn't initially thought that it would be useful in this way, but can prove to again really heighten the user experience. And it all happens seamlessly. The user doesn't need to do anything. The handset tunes over, picks up the spectrum, carrier aggregates it, uses it, and then lets it go. So we're pretty excited about that. And again, not a big R&D issue. It just looks like a piece of spectrum to us. So not something that we need to spend too much time, you know, retuning inside the handset. Back on small cells, this is what our small cell board looks like right now. It's basically pretty small. We envision as the macro network gets closer and closer to the user, you may have a small cell plugged into your office, maybe several rooms at your house. So the reuse of the radio waves is very much viable with the size, and connects very well with the size of these small cells, which can be really just littered everywhere. And again, because they know about each other, they can tune their power up and down. But probably the most exciting thing is the cost. It's essentially looks much like the cost of a handset, but without the screen, without a lot of the graphics capabilities, without a big battery on the back. So we're really excited about that part of it. There'll need to be a lot of them, but the cost will be very, very much lower than obviously compared to a macro, or pico, or femto today. So good things coming on that front. Next, macros right now are built for an outside-in type of deployment. So with small cells, obviously it's an inside-out. And because they can know about each other, you can actually take advantage of anything that leaks out beyond the 4 walls of the building. And that, integrated with what the macro's doing on the other side, can offer all sorts of interesting new services and business models, we think. So someone just walking by that maybe is not a resident of an apartment building actually has the opportunity to utilize that inside small cell spectrum that's leaked out when they're in the proximate location. It's a very capacity in a very localized manner, but again, if you're going to be deploying the small cell, we might as well take advantage of its capabilities. And I think some interesting business models can pop up along that. And the deployment is unplanned. It's not unmanaged, but it's unplanned. And that is going to help we think, in just the pace of deployment throughout the nation. One exciting study we just did is we said, okay, how many of these small cells do we need in order to meet that capacity number, the 1000x capacity number? And in a world where we have another 10x spectrum, so not today, but as the FCC frees up more and we get more out there on the market and we're looking at higher bands and things like that, if we looked at 2 different scenarios, we can achieve, with 10x more spectrum, we can achieve 500x capacity with just a 9% penetration of homes in a dense urban area. And with a 20% penetration, we can achieve our 1000x. So and we actually do this on our campus today. We have 7 cell sites, and we are able to basically operate a small cell network. And we've got this all graphically depicted. We showed it at the Mobile World Congress show last year. and you can see the cell sites going up and down in power, knowing about each other, doing seamless handoffs, very, very exciting stuff. But the numbers are probably the most exciting, that we don't think we need to deploy as dense as we first thought because of the self-organizing capabilities. So we're pretty excited about that. Something we just did recently with Sprint and NASCAR and the folks over at Airspan using their Pico site. We went down to the racetrack in Phoenix and we said, let's try and get the world's densest network deployed for a race, and let's just see what we can do compared to what they do today, which is bring in a cell site on wheels or a cow equipment. What would that look like? And we deployed 31 cells in a cell equivalent density of about 1,000 cells per kilometer squared. And we had them kind of littered around the racetrack in various areas. Just blew away what we thought we were going to do as far as capacity. We achieved 40 times the capacity of the standard deployment of the cow. And NASCAR was thrilled, Sprint was thrilled, Airspan was thrilled, but I think our own engineers were floored because we knew that obviously that the capacity was going to be multiple times, but they didn't expect in a very, very difficult, challenging environment at a NASCAR racetrack to achieve that. And again, kind of an ad hoc deployment. They were just sort of littered around in not a fully planned manner, managed but not fully planned. So thrilled with these results, and we're going to continue to work at venues like this, demanding venues, sports stadiums, things like that, and to see if we can tune this up even further. And we believe we can. That was just the first very, very hyper-dense network that we've deployed, but we're looking to do that several more times over the next few years. So now I'll turn a little bit to 5G, and we've had obviously the panel this morning that talked quite a bit about 5G, and we think it's going to be about enabling new services, devices, and things like that. I think we have a lot of thoughts on this, and not fully defined, but if we could do a redo on the internet, what would we do? We would make it more tuned for mobile. We would make it much more secure, much more reliable. And so when we look at 5G, our view is maybe not just a layering on of 3G and 4G, possibly a new version of the definition of the internet. And we're still kind of playing around with this idea, but we think that, just looking at the internet now, it was really built fixed, not as secure as we would like. And with what I started with, all of these industries starting to move over and wanting to connect, banking industries, healthcare industry, these things need to be highly reliable and highly secure. And if we have the opportunity to make some big changes in collaboration with the community, we'd like to do so and to take the opportunity to do it as we're still in the definition stages of 5G. So it's an area we're excited about. We've just started to get our engineers thinking about what that could mean, kind of if they had a free slate, and then go back and see what's the art of the possible. But that's kind of where our heads are at right now. We're hoping that we're able to make some big, impactful changes as we move into 5G, and don't just make a better 4G, but actually make the internet that we would have liked to have if we could have started over. So we're pretty excited to be part of that definition, and look forward to collaborating with those of you in the room and others in the ecosystem to see where that takes us. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Bye-bye.
Well, that was tremendous. Two great leaders in PCIA, AT&T and Qualcomm. We appreciate their being here. I want to let everybody know that the exhibit hall is opening in just 5 minutes at 10:30. It's only open until 2:30, so get there while you can. It's jam-packed with tremendous opportunities. And most important, the Orlando Magic cheerleaders, a couple of them are going to be there at noon, so don't miss that. It doesn't hurt. Back for more great panels at 2:30, and don't forget the PCI member breakfast for members.